First thing I want to do is remove the wheel. 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts. And remove the wheel. Clip here. This is what holds on the brake hose onto the knuckle. There we go. That comes off. And now get the brake hose off of here. That's loose. Now pop out the ABS wire from here, and it should also pop out of here. Perfect. To remove the sway bar link, I'm going to use some locking pliers on the back side. They provide a little area for you to grab onto, which is good. Lock them on as tight as you can. And then with a 17mm socket, I'm going to take this nut off. Okay, the locking pliers worked for a little bit, but now they're slipping. So I'm going to take them off, tighten them up, readjust. Okay. Perfect. So you can see right here, this is what I was trying to grab onto. They give you this kind of a nut here, and I knew that a wrench wouldn't fit, or I knew that a wrench wouldn't work just because it's so rusty, which is why I went straight to locking pliers. But now that this is off, let's leave it down to the side. I'm going to take the cotter pin off for the axle nut. It's just safer doing this because you don't have to worry about overextending your inner CV joint. Okay, take that off. 32mm socket, remove the axle nut. Make sure it pushes through. If it doesn't, use a center punch and a hammer, punch it through. I'm going to remove these 2 nuts with a 22mm socket, and I'm going to hold the bolt side with a 17 in case it wants to spin. Okay, leave the bolt in there, but the fact that it moved is good. That means it's not seized. Let's do the bottom one. All right. So this bolt is free, which is great. This one is actually completely seized in there. So what I'm going to do before I try hammering it out is I'm going to use the air gun. Just try to spin it, break it free that way. Hopefully I can get it out, and that way I don't have to hammer on the end of it. Okay, it's moving. That's good. Let's go the other way. All right, now when I do hammer on it, to push it out, it's not going to take as much force because it's already broken free. Okay, hammer these 2 out. Okay, the knuckle does move in and out, so that's perfect. That's what you want. Be careful of your ABS wire. You don't want to crush it. So a trick to getting bolts out that are stuck like this is you take a wrench and you basically unthread the bolt as you press on the wrench, and that'll drive it out. There we go. That's out. At this point, you can pull down on the knuckle, push the axle through, separate it from the strut. There we go. Make sure the axle pushes through so it does not separate that inner joint. You can leave that just like this. This can stay like this. There's no pressure on either of these 2. This is extended as much as it will go, and these are safe. So now let's go up top and unbolt the rest of the strut. Now at the top, go ahead and remove this cover. That gives access to the top of the strut, and you'll notice there are 3 little caps here, plastic caps, that cover the mounting nuts for the strut. I'm just going to pop these off. The third one is kind of hidden back there. There we go. Try not to lose them in there. Now with a 14mm, I'm going to take off all 3 of these nuts here. Some of them might be a little tough to get to, but with a couple different extensions, you might be able to get to them. Okay. There's one. For the other two, I had to switch to a shorter extension for that back one. Okay. Remove the rest of it by hand. Now keep in mind, since this is the last one, the whole strut assembly is going to want to go down. So I'm going to hold this strut assembly in place because as I remove the nut, it's going to want to fall down. And once the nut is completely off of the threads, there we go. This comes out. Pay attention to your brake hose and the ABS wire. Make sure you don't rip those off. And here's your strut assembly. Now take your new strut assembly, and it's going to be heavy, so it'll be a little difficult, but you want to guide it in so that these three studs line up with the holes. I have my nuts ready up top so that right there, when it goes through, holding the strut up, I'm trying to thread the nut onto one of the studs. That way it at least can stay on here and I can let go. So I had to switch to a deep socket because on this new strut are a little bit longer. So my regular socket was not deep enough. Okay, I got this one started. I'm going to go ahead and snug it up. And these have a torque spec. I will not be able to torque these, or at least these two, because I can't get the torque wrench straight on, and I don't have a torque wrench that swivels. So those I'm going to have to tighten by hand. I will torque this one, but either way, I can't torque any of them until the very end when there is weight on the suspension. So what I'm going to do is tighten them up now by hand, and then once the wheel is on, the weight of the car is on the ground, I will come back and torque them. Here are the two strut bolts that go through the knuckle. I cleaned them up just because they were pretty corroded, but even though this one's slightly pitted here, it's not damaged enough to where I would not feel comfortable reusing it, so this one's fine. But of course, ideally they would look like this. So this piece of the knuckle needs to slide in here into the strut, and I have a support on my control arm. If you're on the floor, you can just use a floor jack. That'll help you raise the knuckle without having to hold the weight of it. Once the holes are lined up, you can stick both of the bolts through. Wiggling the knuckle back and forth usually helps line up the two bolts. And now with that in, I'm going to take away my support here, and we can put on these two nuts. That's one. Put on the second one. Now let's put the top of the sway bar link back into the strut and reinstall the nut. Snug it up. I'm going to hold the backside with a 19mm wrench, and then I'll torque it to 66 foot-pounds. Okay. Now let's torque it. While torquing, I'm going to have to hold it from the back side. Right there, perfect. 22mm socket and 17mm wrench. Now let's torque it. Okay. 117 foot-pounds for both of these nuts. I'm going to hold the bolt with my wrench. All right, perfect. Now let's put in the ABS wire where it belongs. Now we have to put the brake hose through this bracket. There's a little cutout on the bottom of this bracket, which needs to line up with that little notch right there. It's hard to see. Yeah. It needs to line up with that little notch right there, that little point. So when you put it through, put the hose part through first, and then you're going to have to twist it and wiggle it until everything lines up. And once it does, it'll pull through enough to where you can put this bracket on, which is what locks it in, hammer it into place, and now that's locked in. Now let's put the axle nut on. I'll bottom it out. Now I'm using an air gun, but I'm not using it to tighten it, I'm just getting it close. Okay, now we'll torque it. Now I'm going to take my pry bar, put it through 2 of the lug studs, and that's going to hold the hub for me while I torque this. Just like that. Torque this to 110 foot-pounds. Right there. Now put on this. This is going to lock your axle nut in place. Slide it on all the way. And, well, the cotter pin is supposed to go through one of these slots, but this goes deeper than where the hole is for the cotter pin, but that's okay, at least it's on there. Take the cotter pin and bend it over to lock it in. Come on. Perfect. Now let's get the wheel on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then I'll torque them to 80 foot-pounds. All right, now with the wheel on and pressure on the strut, I'm going to torque all these to 35 foot-pounds. Well, the torque is 35 foot-pounds, but I can't torque those back 2 because my torque wrench doesn't fit in there, so I'm going to torque this front one and then do the other 2 by hand with my ratchet. Okay, that's nice and tight. Once you torque the first one, you kind of get a feel of how tight it's supposed to be. Okay, those are nice and tight. Now, if you remember, there were 3 little caps that have to go back, and just take those and press them back into place. That'll cover up the 3 holes for the nuts. And last one. Okay, and last but not least, this cap here. Press that on. Perfect.